Chapter 5. We stayed that night in a campground at a place called Turquoise Lake in Colorado. It was a real honest-to-goodness campground, with numbered camping spots and picnic tables and crusty metal fire pits. The second we came to a stop in an empty camping spot, I was out the door, Ivan in my arms, ready to go exploring. I wandered down to the lake, sniffing at the smells of cooking hot dogs and toasting marshmallows, dodging the kids zipping around on bikes. I steered clear of the kid-crowded gravelly beach full of splashing swimmers, knowing Ivan wouldn't appreciate all that ruckus and horseplay. Instead, I found a little quiet spot off by itself where the lake lapped up under the shade of some trees. I kicked off my flip-flops, sat down on a log, and slipped my feet into the coolness of the water. Ivan wriggled out of my hands and stepped with cautious paws along the log, bobbing his head curiously at the water. Oh my God! The voice made me just about jump out of my skin. I jerked back so fast I nearly tumbled backward off the log. It rocked underneath me, and Ivan crouched low, digging his claws into the wood. Once we were both steady, I looked up to where the words had come from. There was a girl about my own age, sitting up in the tree above us. She was resting in the crook of two branches, a book held open on one knee. She had round, horn-rimmed glasses and a look of utter seriousness on her face. Sorry if I scared you, she said, but that is the cutest kitten I have ever seen. I smiled up at her. That's probably true, I said back. They don't come much cuter. Can I hold him? She asked, and I shrugged and nodded, and she closed her book with a snap and hopped right down to join us. I scooped up Ivan and held him out to her. She tossed her book back into the bushes and took Ivan nice and gently, just like you oughta. She spun him around so they were facing each other. Ivan hung limp in her hands, looking right back in her wide eyes. Oh, man, she breathed. I am like dying from the cuteness. What's his name? Ivan, I answered. After the book, the one and only Ivan. Her eyes shot me sideways to me. Are you kidding me? That's like my favorite book. Me too, I said, warming right up to that girl. There's nothing like a good book for bringing folks together. I jutted my chin at her book lying in the bushes. What you reading now? I asked her, and she answered, Anne of Green Gables. And I said, Oh, Lord, I love Anne of Green Gables. And she grinned at me and cocked her head and said, Want to come to our camper for dinner? We're having tofu sausages. And then she saw my are you serious face, and she assured me, They're way better than they sound. Pretty yummy, actually. And I shrugged and said, Sure. And then I asked, Can I bring Ivan? And she smiled and said, You better. And I laughed and stood up, and we headed off together, and that was that. Sometimes making friends is tough, and sometimes it's as simple as finding someone who loves books and kittens as much as you do. The girl's name was Fiona, and even though she gave me a look when I told her I went by Coyote, she didn't make a big deal out of it. Always a good sign in a human being. We spent the afternoon mostly at her family site, playing with Ivan and comparing favorite books and avoiding her little brothers. Her family was her mom and her dad and her two little brothers, Alex and Avery, who were kind of annoying but mostly cute, and Fiona was right. Tofu sausages, if you put enough ketchup on them, aren't half bad. After dinner, her dad took the boys down to the lake to burn off some energy, and it was just me and Fiona, sitting around the table talking. Fiona's mom puttered around tidying up the campsite and jumping into the conversation from time to time. It felt like a family, like a sister and a mom. I liked it. I wouldn't have been willing to admit right then that it felt like that or that I liked it, but it did, and I did. Fiona and me mostly just gabbed about books, but we also covered other important topics like favorite pizza toppings and the worst songs on the radio and national politics. Ivan scampered around us, sniffing for food and batting at anything that caught his eye. I was having a fine time right up until Fiona heaved a big yawn and griped, Man, I'm tired. Avery and Alex claim to be afraid of the dark whenever we're camping, and they kept the flashlight on practically all night. So annoying. I know all about that, I said, pulling Ivan back from the bag of marshmallows he was sniffing. I guess I was all swept up in the relaxed family vibe they were throwing off because I kept talking without even thinking about it. My sisters used to always keep the hall light on. But then I caught myself, and I stopped quick and tried to think of something to change the subject, but it was too late. I didn't know you had sisters, Fiona's mom cut in with a smile. Are they here camping with you? No, ma'am, I whispered, shooting a careful look up at our campsite. I squeezed Ivan into a tight hug and kissed his head before letting him go. Where are they? I swallowed. I looked toward Rodeo and our bus. I knew I shouldn't answer. I knew I should come up with an excuse and make a gracious exit. But there was no way Rodeo would be able to hear me. Maybe I didn't want to leave my new friend and her nice mom. There was nothing wrong with that, right? So I answered her with the truth, but it came out stuttery and still at a whisper. They're dead, ma'am. They were killed in a car accident 5 years ago. I could feel Fiona and her mom's eyes on me, but I kept mine on Ivan, waiting for the night to slide back into the nice, easy normal it had been before. Come on, Coyote, as if. Oh, dear, ow, I'm so sorry. That's just awful. How awful. I wanted to say something breezy and light, and I even opened my mouth, but for once I came up short. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her mom put her hands on Fiona's shoulders, pulling her close in a little from-behind hug that made me sort of ache in a weird, quiet way. I just can't imagine, her mom said, her voice faltering. If something ever happened to Fiona or the boys, well, I don't even know. I can't imagine how your mother dealt with such a loss. I flicked a ball of tinfoil, sending it skittering off the table. Ivan scrambled after it in hot pursuit. I kept my eyes down on Ivan. Well then, I guess she was lucky, ma'am. She died in the accident too, so she didn't have to deal with it. I suppose the loss was all me and my dad's. There was another silence, stiff and heavy. I wished Fiona would say something. I could feel her looking at me still, wordless, and I didn't like it. I ain't broken, and I ain't fragile, and that's that. Finally, I managed to swallow down whatever feelings had gotten stuck in my craw. I brought my eyes up wide and daring and ready to meet Fiona's and flashed her a smile. Hey, want to come see our site? I asked. Fiona was biting her bottom lip, but she raised her eyebrows and gave me an eager nod. Where is your family staying, honey? Her mom asked, and her voice was different than it had been all night, and I was ready to get out of there, away from her careful voice and sympathetic eyes. We're just 3 spots up. The end spot up by the campground host. Her mom's eyebrows shot up. That big yellow school bus? That's your camper? How hilarious! I wasn't exactly sure what was so hilarious about it, but I nodded anyway. Yes, ma'am, that there's Jaeger, built to carry up to 56 children and a driver. But we've retrofitted her, of course, and taken out most of the seats. That is just so interesting, her mom said. What an idea! Do you camp in it often? I shrugged. Mostly during the summer. The rest of the year we usually just pull off and park in a parking lot when it's bedtime. Her mom's smile dimmed noticeably. You mean you live in that bus all the time? Yes, ma'am, have for the last 5 years. You don't have a home? I frowned. Of course we do. It's parked right up there. Oh, yes, well, she cleared her throat. So it's just you and your dad living on the bus? And Ivan, I said, holding him up with a smile. Of course, she said back, but her smile looked pretty thin at the edges and her voice was more careful than ever. She stretched her neck a bit, looking up toward our site. Is that your dad there, up on the table? I stood up, and sure enough, there was Rodeo, sitting up top of the picnic table, strumming away at his guitar. He was shirtless, naturally, and he'd untied his hair from the sloppy braid he'd had it in all day, so it was poofed out all wild and frizzy around his head. Yes, ma'am, I said, setting Ivan on my shoulder, but I don't tell him that. I looked away from a frown down to Fiona. Come on, I'll show you my library. Fiona started to stand up, but her mom still had her in that backwards hug, and she kept her hands on her shoulders, holding her down. Actually, hon, it's pretty late. Time to start getting ready for bed, I think. Fiona scowled. What? Come on, Mom. It's not even dark yet. I'm sorry, her mom said firmly, then looked at me. But maybe you could come down and join us for lunch tomorrow. I knew the game. I'd seen how she'd looked at Rodeo, and I knew how he probably looked to her. It wasn't her fault, not really. She hadn't met him yet. Hadn't gotten close enough to look into his eyes. She didn't know that if she actually did meet him, Rhodey'd probably become one of her favorite people. I didn't hold it against her. None of us knows what we don't know, I guess. Thank you for having me for dinner, I said, and I gave her a real smile, too. Want to swim tomorrow morning? Fiona asked. No, Here's the thing. I knew I wouldn't be doing any swimming in the morning. Rodeo had his heart set on some Eastern Carolina barbecue, and we were making tracks that way as fast as we could. We'd be pulling out the next day before sunrise when Fiona and her family would still be asleep. But here's another thing. I know goodbyes, and I hate goodbyes. The best kind of goodbye is the kind you don't even say. So I smiled at Fiona and gave her a big nod. Absolutely. She grinned at me. Awesome. Come down after breakfast. You got it. See you then. I thanked her mom again and gave Fiona a hug and then walked off up the road. And that right there was a perfect goodbye in my book. Easy cheesy. I walked back up to my freak dad in our hilarious, horrifying home, and I didn't have downcast eyes or any sort of heavy heart. Nope, it was all right. It was all right. There was nothing to cry about. There was nothing to cry about. Sure, I would have liked to have had another day there. Sure, I would have liked to hang out with Fiona and talk about books and share secrets and build forts. Sure, but that didn't matter. We always kept moving, Rodeo and me. That's the way it was. That's the way it had been for years. That's the way it was going to be always, I thought. That's the way it had to be, I thought. I had no way of knowing right then that it was all about to change in a huge way.